Bonjour and hello, I'm James, and I'll be your host for this season of the Everyday Forum podcast, an original Stratfest at Home podcast showcasing a sampling of the thought-provoking discussions from the Stratford Festival's 2024 Meighen Forum. The Stratford Festival's Meighen Forum is a festival within the festival, designed to enhance and contextualize the performances in the main Stratford Festival season through compelling discussions, small-scale, exciting performances, and engaging multi-sensory events and workshops. Enjoy! Bonjour and good morning, everyone. My name is James Hyatt. I'm the Meighen Forum assistant. By way of visual description, I'm a medium-height white man with dark brown hair. I'm wearing a orange and white striped shirt over a dark gray t-shirt. I'm standing here at a lectern. My lovely guests have just sat down to the right of me. I'm very glad that you've all been able to join us today for our discussion titled Raising the Curtain and Lowering Barriers, Accessible Theatre. This morning's conversation will touch on disability and accessibility, which are already fairly big topics in themselves, but I want to acknowledge that we are lacking an Indigenous voice in the conversation. While generally with the forum, we think it's important to have more Indigenous perspectives in everything that we do, accessibility is a particular case. The nonprofit group Indigenous Disability Canada reports that Indigenous people in Canada experience a disability rate much higher than the general population. The number is around 30 to 35% that they report. Also, the full range of meanings of the term accessibility, which I imagine will be touched on, they become clear when considering Indigenous people and Indigenous nations, many of which exist in remote communities without easy access to medical care, food, cultural activities, and other necessities, to say nothing of the historical and continuing lack of access to traditional ceremony and medicine through things like the potlatch ban. So in beginning today by acknowledging the land that we've all gathered on today, in acknowledging the nations that have cared for this land for generations, including the Mississaugas and other Anishinaabe nations, and the nations of the Neutral Confederacy, often referred to as Attawandarung, I would also like to acknowledge the intersecting institutional barriers faced by disabled Indigenous people. On with introducing our moderator, Maev Beaty, sitting over there. Maev is a theatre maker, screen and stage actor, voice artist, activist, and mother. She has originated roles in 26 Canadian and world premieres and played lead roles across Turtle Island and for the Stratford Festival for 8 seasons. Most recently as Beatrice in last season's Much Ado About Nothing.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, pals.
Referred to as, quote, the excellent Maev Beaty, unquote, by the New York Times, she's a multi-Dora Award winner and 14-time nominee in both performance and writing. She's a former equity counselor, a founding member of Got Your Back, and on the steering committee for Balancing Act, a national initiative that aims to increase equality, accessibility, and employment opportunities in Canada for artists and cultural workers with caring responsibilities. Maev.
Thank you so much, James. That's the wonderful James. We are so lucky to have him. Hello, everyone. It's so just terrific to have you with us on this gorgeous day. I'm really glad that hurricane passed through last night and left us with a clear morning. My name is Maev Beaty, as James said. I am a 5'9.5" or 10 woman with blonde hair. I'm wearing black pants and a shirt with my favorite jacket on it, which is a patterned, quilted, reversible black and cream jacket that my mom helped me pick out. I really love it. And I'm so thrilled to have the panel. I've moderated a few of these panels now, and this is the perfect example of, okay, wait, we almost have to stop talking because we have to do this in front of the other people because we can probably do this for about 4 hours. There is so much to cover in this bountiful topic of accessibility, partially because we're interested today in speaking about both accessibility for the artists and for the audience, because accessibility is truly universal and inclusive. There is not a divide between the human beings making the art and the human beings attending and participating in the art. And we are interested in a holistic conversation about this today. And there's nobody better to be having this conversation with than the three people with me. Kayla Besse is to my left, and Kayla is the Accessibility Coordinator at the Stratford Festival. And prior to this, she worked at the Tangled Art Gallery in Toronto and completed her master's degree in the School of English and Theatre Studies at good old University of Guelph, just down the road. She co-produces and co-hosts the Crip Times podcast, which you should all subscribe to. At the festival, she sees her role as facilitating a nice time for disabled artists and patrons. And Kayla, if you could just introduce everyone to you and your voice.
Yes, thank you, Maev. This is Kayla speaking. I am about 5 feet tall, which is why if you've been to these forum events before and you've seen guests on the tall stools, we're not using those today. I'm wearing a green dress and white sneakers. I have long brown hair and I wear glasses.
Thank you so much. To Kayla's left is Marjorie Chen, who I've known for many years. She is born in Toronto to settlers from Hong Kong. And Marjorie Chen is the artistic director of my favorite theatre in Toronto, Theatre Passe Muraille. As an award-winning interdisciplinary artist, she primarily identifies as a writer with specific interest in contemporary opera and collective forms, while also maintaining an active practice as a dramaturg and a director. And running a company. No big deal. Marjorie also has a long history of working at the intersection of accessibility and dramaturgy, creating spaces and processes for more radical inclusivity in theater creation. Marjorie, if you'd let everybody hear from you.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. I'm an East Asian woman. I'm approaching 50. I'm also about 5 feet tall, so I appreciate the shorter chairs, so they're almost still too tall for me. I'm wearing a purple skirt and a top with a very 80s pattern, which I can only describe as maybe like cinema carpet. I'm not sure. And my hair is shoulder length. I'm not sure what the original hair color was. It was many years. It's probably, my hairdresser described my hair color as chipmunk. So that might tell you a bit about my personality.
Thanks, Marjorie. To my right, somewhat flatter than the rest of us, the brilliant Dr. Jessica Watkin was deeply hoping to be with us in person, and then she got sick and she's not here close by, so she couldn't come in person. But I am delighted to live in 2024 where we can bring her pretty well. It feels like you're here. You'll see that when I talk to Dr. Jessica Watkin, I'll be looking at the floor, which is weird because you're all looking up there, but there's a mini screen of her in front of me, and that's why I'm looking that way. I'm not looking at your shoes, for example, although they're very comfortable. They look great. Dr. Jessica Watkin finished her PhD at the University of Toronto's Centre for Drama, Theatre and Performance Studies with research on, get this, disability dramaturgy. Brilliant. She is currently an educator, dramaturg, facilitator, and artist scholar in Toronto. She is also Night Swimming Theatre's Metcalf intern in dramaturgy and production in 2024. Jessica, if you would have us introduce ourselves to you in your voice, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. This is Jessica speaking. I'm hoping you can hear me.
Yes, very well.
You can hear me. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, hi. I'm Jessica Watkin. I use she, her, they, them pronouns. I asked to do visual description all the time, and I'm like, what do I do? I am a white settler woman with light brown hair, rose gold glasses and headphones on today, bright, I think red lipstick, maybe burgundy. It was a bit darker than I thought it was going to be, but we're here. And an off-white collared shirt and brown pants that you probably won't see. And I just want to offer some gratitude for allowing me to zoom in. I also am so grateful to be in 2024 where this is possible. So would love to be there in person, but cheering you on from Toronto from a recovery bed at this point now. So thank you.
We're glad you're feeling better and that you could be with us today. In fact, I'm going to start with Jessica because I have no faith in technology. And just in case the Zoom cuts out, let's get her while we've got her. I think she's going to stick around, but just in case. Just a little bit about context for my relationship to the question of accessibility. I've, as my bio said, done a lot of shows in a lot of places over the last 30 years. And I am, again, delighted to live in 2024, where this is starting to become something that is the beginning of conversations and, again, holistically integrated throughout the conversations of how we make theater more and more and more. Not ubiquitously, not across the board everywhere, but a lot of the companies that I have worked with have been striving to improve the integration of accessibility in their processes, and that's very encouraging to me. And I feel like a student. I feel like I learn something every 6 months that is more useful about, oh, that's accessibility too. For example, we lived through a pandemic, and the amount of accommodation for people that were compromised physically because of getting COVID, or likewise, our entire industry all of a sudden went, oh gosh, okay, masks, okay, a new policy for health and safety, okay, a new way of getting people to be able to participate from home while they're recovering or they're on their quarantine time. And it was amazing to see this initiative taken over, understandably, in such a universal way. And it really got me thinking about how we could have been doing that all along and how many chances we have now to build back better, as they refer to, in terms of universal thinking about accessibility in that way and integration. I wanted to start with you, Jessica, because I've never heard the term disability dramaturgy before, and I love it so much. Dramaturgy is a word that people already don't really know what it means. And so I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about the philosophy of that term and what it means to you.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Jessica speaking. First off, I just realized that in my biography, I don't identify as a blind lady, but I can't see very well. So just that, want to acknowledge that I'm coming from this from a disabled perspective as well. And so everything I'm going to talk about is from a blind perspective as well. So I started my PhD in 2016 with the question, really thinking about how do disabled people create performance. And so my hypothesis, my question that I was asking disabled performers and artists was, are you best supported when you create your work? And so at the beginning of my dissertation, I didn't know that this was about dramaturgy. And then through fieldwork, through 2 years of interviewing disabled artists from Toronto and from Canada more broadly, I realized, this is dramaturgical, which again, you're right, Maev, what the heck does that even mean? It means different things to different people. I was just at the Literary Managers and Dramaturgies Association conference in Kansas City, and there was just hundreds of people defining dramaturgy differently. And so I was surprised, but delighted that disability dramaturgy was something that kind of fell into my lap out of asking these questions, particularly around how disabled artists are supported while they make their work. So that is just something that I want to bring into the conversation, that this is also about making the work. It's not a new term for the larger grand disability studies philosophy. This is something that Victoria Ann Lewis has worked on. This is something that internationally artists have different names for. What I'm going to be referring to as disability dramaturgy, which I will get to a definition in a moment. I just like to cite the giants that I'm standing on the shoulders of, because I've created this term, but I've also really been influenced by the disabled artists. So basically what disability dramaturgy is a dramaturgical engagement with disability-oriented issues. And I'm using disability very intentionally. You may notice I didn't call it accessibility dramaturgy. And that's because accessibility has all kinds of different definitions. It has different understandings of different people, particularly legally. I think a lot of people, when they hear accessibility, they think compliance. They think Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, which I'm sure Kayla can talk about in the context of Stratford and the context of every business in Ontario in particular, right? So when it comes to accessibility, disabled people sometimes feel like they're not necessarily in good relationship with. That's a term that I really have been working with, inspired by Black feminist writers and philosophers. Being in good relationship with disability and disabled artists is what disability dramaturgy is. It's a dramaturgical and creative orientation to disabled people, disabled artists, And so for me, it's a tenet of disability leadership, having disabled people involved in the creation and programming and every layer of theater and performance you can think of, in order to imagine disabled artists in your spaces and in order to imagine disabled audience members in your spaces. And so what I've created as Disability Dramaturgy has 3 prongs. The first prong is all about scripts and the actual performance and dramaturgical engagement, and what does disability mean, and what is the meaning being made in that kind of context. The next one is the audience context. So what is the meaning being made, not for non-disabled audiences, which is fine, you're fine, but for disabled audiences. You can tell I'm like, I support non-disabled people, but I also very much am an advocate for a disabled audience. And what, if you say this on stage, or if you have this design choice, what does it mean for a disabled audience? When they're experiencing that, how does that land for them? And is that different? In lots of different contexts, it is. And I think non-disabled people sometimes make assumptions about how disabled people feel. And so having a disabled person in the room really, really helps. And then the third prong is particularly about production, and particularly around, as you mentioned earlier, Maev, the disabled artist on stage. And so actually this year in particular, my practice has really been a little bit script-based for non-disabled people, and a lot heavy being present as a blind and disabled dramaturge for blind performers, and basically supporting non-disabled directors, producers, and then for their understanding of how do they interact with a blind performer who has some different needs on stage, as you might imagine, to a sighted person on stage. So like I'll give a very small example, and then I'll shut my mouth, I was in Calgary recently with a blind playwright and performer, Ashley King, for her new show that's coming, premiering in September at Inside Out Theatre in Calgary, Static. And her show, I was really there to help her kind of deepen her dramaturgical engagement with blindness, and then also to really support the director and design team, actually, with a design workshop. I was like, oh, hello, I'm here. I'm blind. I don't know what that means. But really to support the design of the theater space, to support her in her performing needs. So if she needs to face the audience at certain moments, I would stop the room and go, let's not make assumptions. Ashley, what do you need in this moment? And that's something that's a really basic example of one of my dramaturgical actions as the dramaturge in a production context, to go, okay, if we're going to design this theater space this way, and that will mean something for the audience, what will it actually mean for Ashley as the performer who can't see? And so really supporting her in what colors do you literally need in the space for you to be able to not fall off the stage, that, as granular as that. And sometimes that makes designers feel a certain way. And a part of my job as a disability dramaturge is also communicating and educating in their kind of unlearning and the loosening and maybe even broadening and opening up of the scope of what they can do with their creativity and their work, and allowing them to see it isn't a compromising of vision. The amount of times I've heard you're taking away my creative possibilities. It's like, no, it's just a creative challenge. And so I think, as theater people, we love a creative challenge. We're inside. How are we going to get a live snowmobile inside? That's a creative challenge. I'm just using one from my undergrad days. So, having a blind performer is just a creative challenge. And so disability dramaturgy really allows everyone in the room to have an anchor into how to move through some of these kind of very nuanced accessibility, disability related concepts that I find really rich and really fun. And I've worked with both Marjorie and Kayla on different projects of this nature. And so I know I'm fully confident in all three of us, and that the dramaturgical engagement is very clear. But that's something that I really love. And I don't know if that makes any sense, or if that's just me being
perfect sense.
Okay, it's beautiful.
Perfect sense. Thank you so much for the both the big picture and the little picture, because I think those granular examples are the key to institutional and philosophical change. Because I think whenever we talk about points of advocacy, whatever kind of rights issues that we're interested in fronting in the thinking of an institution, we use words like all the words I just used, which can sound very big and institutional and philosophical and overarching and usually scary because it means an opaque understanding of insurance and costs and extra time that feels like our industry sometimes already suffers from a lack of. But it's the granular examples that click open our minds that say, oh, you just mean that. Oh, it could just be that. Oh, if we just reframe a creative limitation as a creative challenge, it can unlock tremendous theatricality and accessibility to all audience members. And I think what you're talking about, the kind of care that you describe as the job that you need to do as a disability dramaturg, is about communicating and normalizing and easing the fear and anxiety that I think can come up around what will it mean to actually put that philosophy into practice. And those examples are so useful. And with that, I'd love to pass to Marjorie, because my history with Theatre Passe Muraille has been an actual practice of philosophy in this realm of thinking. So I did a show with Theatre Passe Muraille in 2011, which was a show that I created with a girlfriend of mine called Montparnasse, which was about art models in Paris in the 1920s. And one of the wonderful initiatives that Passe Muraille, I think it was, I can't remember whose idea it was, I bet it was yours, but not yours, like meaning you representing Passe Muraille. But it makes sense that you represent Passe Muraille because that's the legacy of that theater, is creative thinking about reaching out to a new audience. So often, I'm sure a lot of the people here have seen a performance where there's an ASL interpreter off to the side, usually, potentially in their own spotlight. And the really interesting project that I was part of was an integrated ASL performance. So we had an ASL performer rehearse with us, wear a kind of costume that was evocative of the costume. We got naked in the show. She didn't get naked, but she wore a kind of costume from the time period, and was rehearsed to be blocked into our action. What this meant for the community that was coming specifically for an ASL interpreted performance was that they didn't have to leave the action of the play with their eyes to go over to the side to see what the dialogue was. They could keep their eyes on us and keep our eyes on the story and receive the dialogue at the same time. And of course, as these things always end up being, it became more beautiful because it became like, what was she? Was she a ghost? Was she an angel? Was she our guardian angel that was with us? There was dramaturgical implications that for us just enhanced the female relationship, the sensitivity of the themes that we were exploring. It was a huge, unforgettable gift for me. And I looked it up this morning. I was like, oh, that was 2011. Okay. So Marjorie was not the artistic director at the time, but she sure is now. So I'd love you to talk about your personal work, but also your institutional work around this.
Thanks so much, Maev. Is any people familiar with Theatre Passe Muraille? I'll give a little bit of history. Just a little bit of history is that there's something that really resonated in terms of what we're talking about in terms of philosophy and how you build that in. And it's super interesting because I always think about the DNA of a company, and sometimes it's hard to shake, or sometimes it's something you really need to examine. And the truth is, Theatre Passe Muraille is a 55-year-old company. It started in a college called Rochdale College in the 60s. It was quite radical. The motto of the college itself was, and I'm probably paraphrasing this, no students, no teachers, no classes, no oppression. So the DNA of that is inside of the name, which was named by Jim Gerard, who is still with us. Theatre Passe Muraille, in French, it's theatre through walls or theatre beyond walls. So really it's a company that had started in a place of challenging status quo and asking questions and really trying to look at ways and poke around the boundaries and the borders of what theatre means, who it's for, who it's created by. So to me, as much as even in 2011, with the previous artistic director, Andy McKim, beginning some explorations with American Sign Language and inviting the deaf community in. It's a natural interpretation of what this company already wanted to do in 1968. So actually I felt like, suddenly I got a little moved by my own statement, that we're still doing this work. We're continuing to trying to challenge. The words kind of that we use that try to hold up these things are innovation, collaboration, community, and accessibility. And the truth is they're all held all together. They're not separate components. They're all things that we think about in relationship with each other. Just a little side note, I know in my bio it talks about radical inclusivity. What does that even mean with, a company, again, that started in the 60s and was like charged with excessive nudity, which is hilarious. What's excessive nudity? I'm not sure. But I did recently meet the lawyer, a lawyer from the firm that represented us, and of course he couldn't talk about it at all, but he represented TPM in these charges, and so that was fascinating. Just to that point is that in 2011 with Montparnasse, because, it's very vulnerable for the performers to be naked on stage, there was the idea to how do you create a more inclusive space? And there was an idea to invite the naturist community in. And in fact, there was connections with the naturist community. There was a clothing optional performance of Montparnasse. The performers were naked on stage, and audience members were welcome to be clothing optional within their own community and be able to experience theater in a way that maybe they wouldn't have normally been able to experience it and are not normally invited into these spaces. So to me, that is an example of, in TPM's past, of what that actually means, of how you can actually hold space and open up space and change an experience for everyone. I think it was formative for the performers as well.
Incredible. Yeah, it's unforgettable. The care with which the theater approached this wild idea so people could come in and they would check their clothing. So, you coat check, well, you would just clothes check. And everybody brought their own towel, which is a practice that is used by that community. And people came early and people stayed after, and we came out to meet everybody after. But how many seats in the main space approximately?
180 at that time.
So about 180, I think we had about 150 people in the nude in the audience, which two interesting things happened. One, the sound was different. There was more slap back of the vocal quality because less cloth to absorb. Just interesting for our sound tech, Dave. You might want to make that a note for later. And also, I would say that most of those bodies were white bodies, and the lights were a bit brighter because there was a bit of light bounce back as well, which was two surprising byproducts. But this community, I spoke with several people from these communities, and there was a woman who was full of tears with gratitude, and she said, "This is our life, our community. We never get to integrate with the real world where, we are shamed and we are ostracized." And she said, "We know why. We get it. But to have the amount of care from this institution for this invitation and participation is life-changing for us. And it was an unforgettable night for me. And they wrote about it in The Guardian. It made it over into the newspapers in England. It was revolutionary. However, it's not necessarily the first thing we think of when we think about accessible audiences. So Marjorie, maybe you could give us some more recognizable examples of things that you've worked on at the theater.
So probably, I've been artistic director since 2019, but probably starting really in the season that started in 2015, Theatre Passe Muraille really started to have a process where, in fact, in that season, every show had a relaxed performance or several relaxed performances, as well as audio description for blind audiences, which is most of them were kind of like a typical audio described performance where someone else is talking into an earpiece for perhaps blind or low vision members, kind of describing the action and talking through the action. There were several in that particular season that were, we like to call them non-traditional or kind of integrated processes, where some of that was live. So it would be heard by everyone. It wasn't in an earpiece. And those we developed with artists, with blind consultants, and perhaps the director might be doing it. So we kind of liken it to kind of like when we had DVDs, like you could get the track where the DVD, you could get the director's cut and you could hear the director say, oh, in this scene or this, but kind of like that. So that the director was painting, kind of doing the painting of the picture while the show was going on. So there were a couple of shows which were able to do that because perhaps it was live address or there was a singular person.
I saw one of those shows, and I'll never forget it. I loved it, and I didn't know that it wasn't intentional for all the performances. I didn't know. I had to be told after that, not every show is like that, but you got the added bonus. And
one show that I had directed, which was called John and Waleed, which was a music show that had some projection as well. So I, as a director, would kind of describe the projection while the music kind of began, and then the song would begin. And one of my favorite things was like, I sat in the house kind of looking down at the audience, doing the description as the show went on, and there were just like 8 dogs, dogs that were just like lying there because they were not being used at that moment, but they just were enjoying the music. And I just thought this feels like the intersection of all my interests. It's music, it's accessibility, there's dogs. Just to say that, part of the practice was learning kind of what was working for some communities, what was working for different people. Not everyone loves audio description as a blind person. Jess is saying this. And so what is it that's possible for different people? And that started an investigation into a more embedded practice and an artistic practice. I've always joked that I'd love to stop talking about accessibility and talk about art, because the way that we can integrate an accessibility practice into our work to make sure our work is accessible, and that is part of the art, that part of the aesthetic of the art is that it's available to as many people as possible. That's a beautiful goal for an artist to want to be able to do that. So that's kind of been our last in the last few years, is finding the way to integrate that into the aesthetic. So there are things that we'll do for a deaf community or for the blind community or for a community that might be sensory sensitive, to hold that. I would say we did a sensory sensitive performance in the last season called No One's Special at the Hot Dog Cart by Charlie Petch. And one of the beautiful things is that there was the overlay of sound was really critical to that show. And at the same time, we also felt like it could be alarming to people. Our beautiful team and lighting designer came up with an idea of like a very simple visual line of a light that just moved across the stage very subtly. And we described to the audience before, look, there's some loud sound in this show. If you see this line coming across the stage, it's going to get louder after that. And it was a very simple, integrated way that still was in the aesthetic of the show, that kind of just let people know that there might be sound that was quite loud coming up. Those kinds of things are the ways that we can draw people in further, and that shows through the art can aesthetically help people bring more people into the theater.
I love this, and I love that as someone who is not particularly sensory sensitive, that I would experience that show, and there's something happening for me dramaturgically where I see the light and I don't know it's a signal, but then there's a sound cue that feels powerful to me emotionally. It's a completely integrated, artful dramaturgy, as far as I can tell, that is also specifically useful for people who may require it. It's a great example of the holistic approach to that. I want to come back. I want you to talk about the Albania show as well. Wait for it, folks. But if I don't give Kayla the mic, I'm going to be mad, because I love that we're going to transition with all good intention from an institution who set out to be radically transgressive in many ways, to the Stratford Festival, which has its own radical transgressions, but maybe wasn't baked into the bread of what the initial imagining was. And Kayla has worked with this institution for a few years now, and I'd love you to speak about what you've learned. And the thing that I'm really bridging from what I heard from Marjorie to asking you, Kayla, is this idea of the integration and the wideness of the scope of what you're talking about. That this isn't, we have a specific community that has a specific needs. We have to specifically make this accommodation to suit that specific, but rather baked into the philosophy of the creative process. How can we cast that net wide so we are, in fact, bringing in the audience that we're going for?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Go. Do you want? Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Maev. So yeah, I've been with the festival since 2022. And much like Jess forgot to mention in her bio that she's blind, I forgot to mention I live with cerebral palsy, so I have lived experience of physical disability that I bring into my work. Can't leave it at home. And much like what you've all been saying, when I interviewed for this job, one of the interview questions that they asked was, can you tell us about your knowledge and experience of the AODA and implementing it? And I took a risk and I said, of course, it's the law. The AODA is very important and we need to be compliant. But I said, if you're only interested in compliance, then I don't think this is the right fit for me, because as you've all been saying, if accessibility is not baked into the creative challenges that you're looking to meet, then it's really boring and it's not going to bring people in a way that's going to practice the magic of theater in the way that we understand it. So I'll tell you kind of what my job is on paper, and then I'll give you a couple little examples of the things I get to play with that are different all the time. So it's my job to think about disability and accessibility for guests, for patrons, for artists, everybody, staff who works here. And we offer 4 different types of accessible performance on paper. So we do audio described performances, which we've been talking about. Those are designed for blind and low vision audiences, and they describe key action on stage. We prioritize hiring real people to do this work. There's been a bit of a push and an interest in the industry to say, hey, can AI do this, or can we have it through an app? We want real people to do it. They're going to do a better job. So we have someone up in the booth and they're describing live what's going on. I'll give you one example of, I would say, the most radical audio description show that I've been a part of. Last year, we did an adaptation of Frankenstein, which was all movement and dance based. There was no dialogue. Some people are nodding. Did some people see it last year?
Oh, everyone pretty well.
Everyone's seen it. And one of the actors is here too. So there was no dialogue in that show. And so we said, okay, challenge. What if we audio describe the show that has no dialogue? Well, poor Ruth in the booth, the audio describer, is going to be basically doing a radio play, right? She's going to be talking the whole time. And she did, and it was amazing. And we had a group of about 30 blind folks from the CNIB that came together on a field trip, and their feedback was amazing. They said, no one's ever done it like this. And so that was really rewarding. It was so cool. So that's audio description. We also...
Do you have a recording of it? I want her to get royalties. I want it to be I want it to be a podcast that's sent out to the
I think we have the script. I don't know if the live version was recorded, but it could happen.
The guys
maybe
would be so into that. Them who created the show. Okay, go on.
Right, yeah. One more note on audio description. And so what I'm getting at, that's one of the 4, so I'll walk you through the others. But what's been really exciting about this role is helping everyone in every department understand how accessibility fits into the work that they do. Like, it can never be the job of one or two people. That's not possible, and I don't have all the technical skills needed, and no one person does. I also want to shout out our digital team, some of whom are here today as well. If anyone has seen Stratfest at Home, which is the streaming platform that came about also during the pandemic, that's also really awesome accessibility to people who are not geographically close to here or aren't able to see every show for whatever reason. There's these beautiful recordings of a number of the shows. And they've committed not only to captioning all of those, but the main stage productions from 2023 onwards that were recorded have that audio description track on them. And so you can turn that on at home. You can read the captions if you want or need. You can listen to the audio description if you want or need, which is so amazing. I love that. Captioning, we are bringing back this year. There was a little leg with COVID, like there was for so many things. We engage a live captioner who comes, and there'll be open captions, so visible near the front of the stage, and we block seating for folks who need that. And it is a goal longer term to have that more integrated, but that's really wonderful as well. If you want to see Salesmen in China this season, there are integrated captions doing translation between English and Mandarin in that show as well, built in because of the multiple languages used in the show. So again, another really amazing example of creative accessibility rather than compliant accessibility. And then we offer ASL interpreted shows, a number of those per year. Just last weekend, we did a deaf-led interpretation of Twelfth Night. So that meant that the person who was interpreting, facing the audience, their name is Sage Lovell. Their company is Deaf Spectrum, and they do amazing work. And so Sage is deaf, and Sage had two hearing interpreters sitting in the audience where they could be seen cueing, okay, this is the line that they're on in English. And the deaf ASL using community is going to have just that additional level of cultural understanding from a deaf person being the one to translate the show. So again, huge win. We have several fantastic accessibility contractors, but another one I want to shout out is Dr. Lindsay Snyder, who will be here in October, ASL interpreting Romeo and Juliet, if that's of interest. Lindsay did her PhD in ASL and Shakespeare. And so when I started this job, I went on Twitter and I was like, hey, who knows ASL and Elizabethan English? And about 5 people directed me to her, and she lives and works in DC, and we've had the opportunity to bring her up once per season since I've been here. And so she's probably a world expert on this work. And so we're so privileged to get to work with these artists and creatives behind the scenes who, work for months and months to do ASL translation, to write scripts for audio description, and think about all these things really holistically. And, you might only see them for one show, but the work that goes on behind the scenes is immense. And then last but not least, we offer relaxed performances. Do people know what that is? A little bit, not as much. So that's actually how Marjorie and Jess and I kind of initially got to work together. So this was between 2018 and 2020. The British Arts Council was interested in bringing this relaxed performance training from the UK to Canada. So it was initially conceived to support folks from within the autism community and folks who have other neurodivergence or sensory sensitivities who may have been told historically, hey, you need to leave a theater space if you're fidgeting or stimming or vocalizing, or you can't sit totally still and silent for 3 hours. They were like, that's not great. So relaxed performance doesn't police audiences. So you're welcome to move and make noise and leave and come back as much as you need to, in addition to modifying some light and sound cues. So for example, if there was strobe, we would eliminate that so that we don't trigger a seizure for anybody. If there's a gunshot, we'd probably cut that out so you don't jump out of your skin, things like that. And then we would offer a pre-show talk to explain, this is what the relaxed performance is going to be like. And we have a chill out space outside of the theater. So if people need like a lower sensory time, they can go and do some coloring or, just sit on the floor and do whatever they need to do. So that's how the three of us, we got to work on that training and kind of go across the country and work with folks doing this work all over the place. And that was really formative. And so there's a relaxed performance of Wendy and Peter Pan on July 20th. I got to shout that out if that interests you and you're in town. Come check that out. So yeah, that was my long-winded. Those are kind of like the 4 types of shows that I am responsible for supporting. But I wanted to, if I may, keep blabbing.
Now I'm just going to stop and say, all of you stop apologizing for blabbing. That's literally why we're here. If you don't say anything, nothing happens. So that's what we want.
Okay, great.
Okay, your turn.
Fantastic. So last season in 2023, we had the wonderful opportunity to work with an actor named Debbie Patterson here at the Tom Patterson Theatre. Debbie is a wheelchair-using actor. If anyone saw Richard II or Grand Magic last year, you saw Debbie at work. Okay, claps for Debbie. Yeah. I love her so much. She's amazing. And full disclosure, the reason why both of the shows she was cast in had to be here is because it's the most physically accessible theater of the 4 at the festival. It's the newest. From a patron perspective, it's very good, right? There's lots of wide paths of travel. Oh, someone's shaking their head. It's the best that we have here so far. But it was interesting to get backstage and go, wait, the designers of this space imagined, patrons with disabilities, and we might need some accessible seating and washrooms and all that stuff. But the imagination didn't extend to folks working backstage. So we had to do a ton of work installing automatic push buttons backstage, installing grab bars in change rooms, worked to the wonderful carpentry folks built a custom costume rack so that you could be seated and pull it down and then push it back up. All of that good stuff. I got to work with the choreographer on Richard II to think through, okay, what does wheelchair choreography look like? How do we integrate movement from someone who's going to be in a chair the whole time? Are we going to do a lift? Is that safe for everyone? So all those little things to support someone on stage.
Yes, I think it's so
cool.
I think we can all agree that this is one of the most beautiful theaters we have in the country now, and it truly is. Love being in this space. But it is an amazing learning moment of realizing what was thought about for the patron experience versus what was thought about for the performer experience. And I believe I hope you'll write down or talk about the particular issue we're talking about. But there is also a challenge just from getting from the parking lot to the front door, the beautiful, the long journey that might take, or how that journey is most quickly or efficiently done. But it's a similar thing to, there's this beautiful winding path down to the stage door, which I can't quite figure out why it's just not straight. It's because one has to go quite a bit of a distance to get down there. And so if you're doing that distance in a wheelchair, it's a curvy line as opposed to a direct, and it's pretty steep. But one would never, I think, fault the architects for not keeping this in mind. This is why these crucial conversations are happening now, because the next architect won't make that mistake. And this is the steep learning curve that we are on now, I think, institutionally. Speaking of that, I wanted to talk a little bit more, and Jessica, we haven't heard your golden tones in a few minutes. And I want to talk a little bit more about what it means to be thinking about the audience and the performers, what it means to be thinking holistically about access in that way. And there was a great example of the relaxed performances. The other thing I was thinking about earlier is that you have this as you just mentioned, Kayla, a few dates of performances coming up. You have this date put aside for your ASL interpreted performance. Well, boy, I really hope everybody who needs that service can come on July 14th at 2 p.m. And of course, that's a budget issue and a logistics issue. But can we just talk a little bit? I believe you were saying not all blind audience members are fans of audio description. I'd just love to toss it back to you and say, what are you a fan of? And when you think, okay, I can only go to that show I really wanted to see on Tuesday afternoon, and geez, I have to work. And too bad there isn't another performance that would suit my needs. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Oh, it's interesting. Thank you for that question.
If I'm being too provocative, you choose which one to.
Provocative. No. I think what it is for me, and what Marjorie kind of gestured towards earlier when she was mentioning about some blind people not loving audio described performances. That's me. Part of my job and my PhD and literally what I'm hired to do all the time is to advocate on behalf of accessible performances. I am not, I'm like, is this the right place? Yes, it is. It's fine. I don't love accessible performances. If I'm wearing just Dr. J, I am here to support other disabled people. I'm here for it. If I have just like, I'm Jess Watkin and I'm wearing red lipstick and going to the theater, I will actually want to see the quiet performance. I facilitated Frankenstein's Pro last year with Morris Panich, and I mentioned that one of my favorite performances right after I went blind in high school, that's a whole other Jess Watkin story. I came to see Moby Dick at Stratford Festival, I think in 2010, forever ago. And I was in high school, it was my last year, and I was like, yay, theater. And it was a show that had one word in it, and the rest was completely dance performance, similar to Frankenstein. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm going to fall asleep during this show. So I couldn't see anything. And it actually, I remember it. It's one of the shows that I remember the most out of all of the shows I've ever seen, and as a blind woman. And it was because for me, when I watch performance, I love to be in proximity with live actors. I love to hear their breath. I love to hear their slap on the ground and their feet moving and in proximity to other performers. And so when Marjorie was mentioning about like creative accessible formats, which we've kind of heard about peppered throughout this performance, that's what I love. I don't want to hear somebody in my ear, because I have a whole paper about this, about how when you listen to audio description, and if you've never listened to audio description, every Netflix original has audio description. You want to turn on an episode of Bridgerton tonight? You throw on the audio description and tell me how sexy that show is. It's not. It's much more clinical, let me tell you. Although my partner sent me a link and he was like, it kind of feels like a weird like audio describing audiobook. And I was like, yeah, it sounds clinical. And so when you experience an audio described performance 99% of the time, or at least that I've experienced, it feels like there's a weird stranger whispering in your ear and telling you what's happening, and you don't necessarily get to decide what's happening. Or like, you know, I love a performance. I was talking with an artist earlier this week, Yolanda Bonnell. I'm dramaturging her upcoming piece, The Eighth Fire Project. And she's been doing a lot of integrated audio description, which means that members of the staff, the cast, speak out the action that's on the stage, kind of what Marjorie was mentioning that was happening earlier on in Theatre Passe Muraille. It's now happening from the performers on stage, which has happened at multiple performances I've seen lately. And we were talking about how we want to trust an audience can be like Sherlock Holmes. Mm-hmm. So like a blind audience can listen to things and figure it out on their own. Some blind people really love that. Jess Watkin, one of them. Some blind people really don't love that, and they really love audio description proper, what we've been talking about. And the hardest part, I think, about accessibility for me and being in good relationship with disabled folks is that not one blind person's experience and preferences are not the next. And so I understand because of resources, and we can all talk about how the limitations on resources, you can't have 17 different audio described performances. How many blind people are going to come see that? That's a lot of time and energy and resources for those certain performances, so that you can have a buffet of different accessible options. You know, that's my dream. 20 years down the line, let's have a fun run of a show that has just a buffet of different accommodations offered a different one every night. So I think for me, like that's That's
say
the
yes.
blue skies, right? Hell yeah. You know, in 2020, I dramaturged a show that had a different flavor of relaxed performance every single evening. So one person's relaxed performance is another person's anxiety performance.
Yeah.
You know, we've all been in a show before where someone's talking behind you, or opening up a really I was watching in a deaf show, like that had deaf interpretation, that someone was eating a really loud bag of chips behind me. And I remember sitting there going, oh my God, that's so annoying. Wow. What is happening? And then I remembered that they probably can't hear the bag. They're probably deaf. Like they can't hear the bag of chips. And I'm like, what a bad disability advocate I was in that moment. I didn't say anything. But, you know, even, you know, you mentioned earlier, Maev, about being a student in this. I have a PhD in disability and performance, and I'm still learning. You know,
Yes.
I only have my own perspective. And so all this to say, I don't know if I've answered. I think I've answered some of your questions.
No, you have. But you know what I'm so excited by what you're saying. But what it makes me think about is two things at once, which is in my working with the caregiving community, and I work with Balancing Act, whose specific interest started off as being how can we support parents and working moms and dads in the theater, and then it soon became, oh wait, how can we help people who are also taking care of an elderly parent? Oh wait, how can we help people who are also taking care of a sick spouse? Okay, how can we help everybody? Because everybody is a caregiver. And one of the founding philosophies with which we approach each challenge is, and the way we talk to institutions about how to prioritize these things, is saying it is never going to be a question of if somebody gets sick, if someone has to leave work early because of their kid, if somebody starts to lose their vision. It's only a question of when. If you're working with human beings, this is always ever an inevitability. And so we tilt our thinking towards the great when, the capital W when, and we include everyone accordingly in that thinking, because it could be you, it could be me, it could be my husband, it could be my kid, it could be anybody. And so that's the yummy philosophy with which we approach this, which is also something I've heard said in another way, which is that if you think about the person who has the most accessibility needs, how can we make a show that they feel welcome at? Then you catch everybody else on the way. And that's why that person is a gift, that the imagination of that person is a gift to your production, because then you are in fact including everyone. And I say those things knowing, Marjorie, that this is kind of the philosophy with which you are approaching your programming. And can you also in that talk about when you have renting companies?
Oh, yes. So just maybe to tie into that I'm just excited about that, how it's a question of when, and back to kind of, you know, we have these conversations, you know, some people write PhDs about papers about these, but we think very deeply about this audience experience that is more inclusive. And one of the things we've talked about is the relaxed performance that just offers perhaps a more informal way to enjoy theater, or just a little more relaxed is all that it is. And just to say that we met during that process in that training with the British Council, and Theatre Passe Muraille has been exploring that, of what that means for this company. We've certainly had relaxed performances probably since 2015, but as of last season, we have a venue-wide relaxed environment. And that means that for us, for every show, the ability to leave and return, so you don't fear that if you have to use the washroom, you can't come back to the theater, it is in place. So there's a little bit of low light. Our staff are trained in that. Everyone, because we announce that and because we say that, everyone's consenting. No one's mad at the person that, you know, needs to step out because their back hurts for a minute. We always kind of have in terms of support, a visual story, what we call an access guide now, so that there's more information about a show, so people can hold that. So there's a couple other elements that we keep that are not fully relaxed performances, or as those defined, but things that we hold venue wide. And the reason what Maev is mentioning is that we've extended that to our rental companies so that we're in conversation with the theater community about this venues. Like, so communities are, our audiences are coming and they have that expectation that they can have, there's a little more informal. We're already informal if you haven't guessed because of all the naked stories, but yes, a little more informal in that way that gives people a little more space to be able to engage with the show. And all that to say that just links me back to what I think about is like, so the reason those processes we think about these things, we think about so specifically about our audiences, and then in practice for our theater, we're like, actors have to be here for 4 hours. They have to be there for these. Here, they're working in rep. They're working, and then they go and do a show at night as they're rehearsing their next show. That's quite intense. And then you have tech hours, which can often be very, very long in theater. So we're all saying to our community, yes, be relaxed, be informal. But then to our artists, we're saying, no, go. You be relaxed. We're gonna do a relaxed performance. Which is like totally antithetical to the ideas around the relaxed performance, that the extension of that from inviting our audiences in should be also inviting our artists into perhaps a process that's a little more relaxed.
And because of that, as you said, your theater now has a reputation both for the audience. They know that when they come, there's that expectation of, well, what some would call it freedom, or a more relaxed environment that they know what to expect. And so when a company comes to you and says, "Can we do a show there?" that they also might think, "Okay, we have a show and we're interested in. We have a deaf performer actually, and where are we going to do that show? Oh, we're going to do it at Theatre Passe Muraille because we know they have the structure set up." Yeah,
one of my most exciting moments to me is like that creation of community and having we were talking with a deaf artist whose show we will announce soon, maybe by December. But we're talking with a deaf artist, and he came to experience our theater. And on that particular night, there was deaf interpretation, deaf-led interpretation. And also, it was a snowstorm, but also we had some seniors from Bob Rumble, which is a deaf retirement home in Toronto. And so these deaf seniors were here with their walkers and came to see the show. And to me, if that deaf artist who we were hoping they would do their play with Theatre Passe Muraille, if they had any doubts at that moment, I would hope that at that moment that this invitation, that we had 12 deaf seniors who had come to a show in a snowstorm to experience this show would affirm for him, our desire and our commitment to the community.
Yes. Yeah. And I wanted to loop back to, I believe you said the limitations of resources, Jess, earlier, but and this one of the questions here is, can you talk about the economics of accessible performance? So there were two fantastic examples of using the resources already in place for something else, to make a further accessibility. So I was wondering if you could talk about the kiddo that you mentioned earlier, and Marjorie, if you could talk about the Albania show. That's I have the inside scoop. You're going to like these stories, trust me. Okay, go Kayla.
Thank you. It's also worth mentioning, so my role at the festival, we have an EDI department, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion department. And there's currently, 3 of us. We're just 4. Our director just moved back to Atlanta, so we miss him. But there's Daviar's left. 3 of us who do this work and are so privileged to be here full-time, year-round, thinking about these things and planning, like we're already planning ahead for 2025. And so we're uniquely fortunate compared to a lot of theater spaces that this is worked into the budget. Like the budget for all the different types of access shows is there already, with also some leeway for if a particular group approaches us and says this is a real example. Hey, we want to come to an audio described Romeo and Juliet in the fall, and we want to have a touch tour beforehand, and we can say, okay, we can do that. And a touch tour is where folks are able to come and before the show touch some of the props, costumes, other things to get a sense of, oh, this is, the material that's going to be on stage. So that's, we're very lucky here in that way. But it's also as much as it's a matter of money, it's also a matter of time. So something that we've been able to implement is looking at the designer contracts and saying to people a year in advance, okay, you're going to be on this show and it's going to have a relaxed performance. That means you're going to need more time because you're going to have an alternate audio track that you're creating, or you're going to modify your lighting cues in some way. And so it's a matter of having really early conversations with directors and with design teams to make sure that they have paid contracted time to commit to accessibility, so that, again, it's baked in, it's everyone's responsibility. I almost said problem. It's not a problem. It's a joy, but it's money, but it's also time. Like this stuff, we're still learning all the time. Every show is different. There's no blueprint for like, how do I make this show accessible? Like it's different every single time, which is what keeps it fun.
It's funny because we're all the four people on the panel today are quick talkers, eh? We're all like, I've got a lot to say, and I have a lot to say to you guys right now, and I want to get it all in because we only have an hour and a half.
Yes, but
it does take. It does. The reason I brought it up is because the question of time is huge, and I think and I think I heard Jessica say this in our initial conversation, but just slow down, not today because we want to get a lot of information to you guys, but in process, the ability to slow down, step back and think, oh gosh, there's a bunch of problems we have to fix, as opposed to, whoa, if we just stop together and breathe and step back, a beautiful creative solution is going to arrive.
Mm-hmm. And so the story you wanted me to get to, a lot of what I do is also outreach. So talking to groups, schools, communities, and saying, hey, do you even know that we offer this? Like, maybe you want to come. Recently, we had a school group come to Wendy and Peter Pan, a bunch of grade 1 little kids. And it wasn't an accessible performance in any way, but you may be familiar. We have devices called HARs, hearing assistance receivers, which can support you in hearing dialogue better, amplifying the dialogue if you're hard of hearing. And there was this little grade 1 girl who had a cochlear implant, and her teacher wrote to me and was like, can she try the HIRs? She's never used that tech before. And she loved it so much that she came back with her parents the next week because she wanted to show them, that tool that allowed her to access the show equitably in a similar way, which is like so heartwarming.
Just as having a moment. It's
right?
so,
so
sweet.
cute.
And what I love about that is that it's just a question of changing the mind frame of who these services are for. Mm-hmm. So at the Stratford Festival, as you well know, we have a lot of audience members who are retired because they have time to come to a matinee. Mm-hmm. A lot of people can't come to matinees because they are still working, but we have a beloved and crucial audience base that is of a certain age, and so we have a lot of accommodations for those age. We have the audio description, we have the enhancing, and a lot of those services are thought of, I think, by the institution as well as just the whole community for the older population that's coming to watch, because maybe they're having more, like my dad who uses them all the time because of his hearing issues. But we do have this ageist thing where we're like, this is for the old people that are coming to the show, as opposed to this is just this performance enhancement or these other accommodations or philosophies baked into the bread of how we're going to present this show, including outreach. How are we going to go and find the communities and let them know that these things are available and that we are a welcome space for them? For example, a community that may not have English as a first language.
Yes. So just on that point is that, just to reinforce and affirm what Maev has said at the beginning, that, when practices are held up, if if you make practices as such that it's more welcoming to an aging population, you're going to make it more welcoming for everyone. And eventually we won't feel that that's a special thing that needs to be done. It's just something that we can hold, and that's the way that we can attend theater. We no longer kind of have a kind of like real formal aesthetic when we go to the theater, that we can actually enjoy these things. I sometimes I think about these things like at the movie theater, at the cinema, just to say that like someone could be eating or having to leave and we don't actually feel like that interrupts our process. The art holds us, and we're like, no, I understand that person needs to use the washroom, and they're sensitive. They're not trying to ruin anyone else's experience or trying to interrupt experience. They're just taking care of themselves because they might need a drink of water or something, or whatever reason. It actually doesn't matter. So that opening up all those processes help that. Just to speak to kind of translation and language, so and also kind of like using technology and kind of exploring what's possible. So this was a show that initially was planned for the pandemic, so we weren't able to accomplish this live, but we were able to do it in a digital way. It's a show by our artistic producer at Theatre Passe Muraille called Indrik Kasapi, who's of Albanian heritage, and he wrote a play. It was written in English, but it's really about Albania and about blood feuds in Albania. And we really started to feel like, okay, we'll make sure that there's a show, what we'd first envisioned, we'll do a show that has Albanian translation of the English script so that an Albanian community could come experience the show. And we did realize, we were like, that's not available to anyone who's blind or low vision and needing the Albanian translation. So we began some work using the initial earpieces that we would use for audio description. So again, repurposing technology that we already had and reusing it in a different way. We had live Albanian actors in a booth performing the show in Albanian, so that people who needed that could have that oral support, A-U-R-A-L, I'm dyslexic also, so could have that support in the ear and also be experiencing the show visually if that's how they wanted to, and they could make those choices. It was something that we continue to explore doing the other way as well. If there's a French show on stage and if there's an English translation with live actors in the ear. So, people who are bilingual, have multiple languages, but may need support, can have a different way of support that other than visual is what we were curious about.
And this is a beautiful example of using resources you already have and repurposing them and reimagining them for a wider scope of audience. That being said, in response to the question about economics, Marjorie, earlier you said this, and I'd love to hear each of you just throw a couple words at this. How do you approach the question of cost, the thing that the guys in the office and the gals in the office are going to come back and say,
Yeah, I think it's super challenging if it's new to your process because it's not in your budget, and there's I would say that something that we hold is that we kind of say your budget is a moral document, because if you've not budgeted for childcare for your actor, for example, that means you're saying childcare is not important to you. That means you're saying the actor's child is not important to you. It's very reductive to think of it that way, but it's a flip way of thinking about it, so that you have to put those resources. I would say that once those resources are in a budget, again, that comes from a philosophical approach. That's why I say it's a moral approach. What's the right thing here? The right thing is to support an artist in order that they can be at a rehearsal. If it means that they have to travel 2 hours in, if it means that their commute is that long, well, then maybe you're not doing 8-hour days. Maybe you have to do shorter days to support that individual. But if that is not in your budget, then you have to build that, and you have to reconcile that with what moral implications that has.
Your budget is a moral document. We love this. And Jessica, will you talk about money for a minute?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Normally, honestly, I'm going to be completely honest. When people ask me this question, I go, you know who you should talk to? Marjorie Chan. Because a lot of the time I get this question and they're leaders of theaters, right? Going, how do I do this? And I go, you know who's doing it? Marjorie. She'll tell you exactly how. So that's my honest opinion. My second one, when I'm working with companies, which I do, part of my facilitating and consulting, educating work is working with companies on how to develop their philosophical and practical plan for their company to expand and invite disabled people in, both as artists and audiences in a different way. I'm going to say something really unpopular, and I know that it's really unpopular to say this. So I'm just going to do less. Do less so you can spend more money on the things that then your budget can reflect your morals. And I think like a lot of the time when I say do less, people are like, oh, but how are we going to make the money? And I'm like, okay, like reframe everything so that you're meaning like one less show so that you can do another show better. So you can add more resources to that other show. And I understand why I'm in an internship right now for production, because producers are always like, your advice is always to do less, and that's not realistic. So Night Swimming is graciously teaching me a little bit more about the practicalities of producing. But I think for me, that's my biggest is when you're thinking forward the next 5 years, 10 years, do less so you can do more better. That is my other big resource and
do
money.
Less so you can do
advice.
more better. It's just we're just full of amazing sentences today. Kayla, no pressure, Kayla. I just wondered if, because you are, to say the beautiful, beloved elephant in the room, those of us who, and I know a bunch of you have been at performances maybe where we've asked for donations for the Actors Fund. And it's always interesting to throw out some facts during those speeches. Specifically at those times, we're talking about the fact that people in our industry have no safety net. There is no, there's just none. There's no safety net for the rainy day or the injury. But also part of that is we always acknowledge in those speeches that we are blessed to be giving those speeches from the Stratford Festival stage. And so we are already the luckiest people in the country because we are working at one of the most supported and big budgeted institutions in the country. That said, we all know that the pandemic has been devastating for our industry and that all institutions are trying to think creatively how they can financially survive and thrive, and also support all the new interests that we are asking them to prioritize. And they are working hard to do so. But how's that gone for you?
Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned, it was so fortunate to have, I'm the first person in this role as accessibility coordinator, but this access work had been going on long before me. Folks in HR were responsible for coordinating those performances and managing that budget. I agree with what Jess said, doing fewer access shows better is a good strategy. In fact, from 2023 to 2024, we reduced our number of audio described shows for that very reason. And I'll also be honest, like if you're doing this for the first time, you might only have 2 users of a service the first time that you offer, for example, an audio described show. But the way that that's going to build is not by throwing more money at it. It's by building relationships with the people in those communities who are going to bring their friends. Because the other elephant in the room is that a lot of disabled folks are low income or on ODSP and don't have a lot of disposable income to spend on things like going to the theater. But if you build that trust and 30 people can say, I went to Frankenstein last year and it was the best thing I've ever experienced, then they might bring a friend next year. They probably will. And that kind of like community building and trust is what makes your quote like investment worth it. Like that's when you're going to see people show up, is when someone else in their community is like, I had an amazing time at the Stratford Festival and here's the specifics of what was offered. Something I often say is accessibility, like people get nervous around doing it wrong or offending someone. But if you can do hospitality work, you can do accessibility work, because it's really just being like, hey, what do you need? Can we do that? Oh, we can? Oh, sweet. Like, it doesn't have to be so scary.
Hospitality work is accessibility work. See, you had another amazing sentence.
There it is.
These are all the tattoos I'm going to go get after today's performance.
We're getting matching tattoos after this panel.
There are a bunch of wonderful things written on papers here, and I want to just float through some of them because we are running out of time. But I just saw Suffs in New York City, and one of the cast members was in a wheelchair for the dances, and when she acted, she was on her feet. It was obvious she was differently abled. I was really happy to see that. On TV, I see differently abled actors all the time, but on British shows, because the Brits have been doing all of that better than us for so long.
Yeah. So in 2012, they had, just to speak to the British, I don't know why I was doing an accent. I don't know why I did that. In 2000, where policy works, where policy makes changes, is 2010, they had the Olympics, 2012, they had the Olympics, and with it comes the Paralympics, and with it change in policy all across the UK, and that's what really informed how all of the labor policies shifted in order for that to trickle down into the theatrical community, into all the industries. And that baseline is something that fundamentally changed the culture in the UK. And that's why that representation, from my understanding, is the way it is because of policy. So I also don't want to neglect that there is power in legislation as well. Jess has, yep.
Sorry, the policy is called Access to Work, and essentially it empowers disabled people to have funds and control over who supports them as they work. So if you are, I was just talking to Alex Bulmer about this last night because she's actually moving back to the UK part-time so that she can have access to work to be successful, because it allows the disabled person, the government gives them funding if you are working in any industry, and you are allowed to choose who your support workers are and how your money is managed, versus having to hire them through a company or having to get a grant and then having to go through different functions. And so that's something that she calls for, that I call for here in the, I almost said the United States. Well, in Canada, the United States too, they can have it as well. But here in Canada, we don't have infrastructure for support for disabled workers, laborers. And so something that happened in the UK was the government tried to take that away, and non-disabled people protested. And so I think the other part I'll add there is that it's not just disabled people aren't the only people who see the value of policy support and labor support for disabled people. Non-disabled people completely support the support of disabled people in Britain, and for lots of different political reasons. But it's something that, as the Commonwealth brainchild of the UK, it's almost amazing that in a bad way that Canada doesn't have something similar in their political and policy structures, because it would definitely support disabled people to be able to move into industries like this, because support is so fraught. It is something that you have to rely on, community care communities versus, something that's specifically given to you by your employer, for example. It makes you a better candidate in those industries.
Yeah, and what you're saying about the non-disabled community, it is in risking saying something wrong, that there is a theme today about the separation of community is not really real, and it's not but it is there. I mean, I understand that there is self-identification, but in terms of benefit and community care and relationship and everyone benefiting from integrating the needs of the disabled community as non-disabled community is a no-brainer. Go ahead.
Jess was mentioning Alex Bulmer, who's a blind artist and performer. She was here 3 years ago in the production of R&J. I don't know
in
if
the
anyone's
tent.
In the tent.
Tent season.
Back to your DNA. There you go.
Well, and are there any performers we should keep an eye out for who are in this category, is one question from our audience. So it's a great shout out moment. Alex Bulmer is definitely one. Who else brings to mind? We talked about
Debbie Patterson. Debbie runs a theater company in Winnipeg called Sick and Twisted Theater. If you're ever out that way, check them out. Fantastic.
This upcoming season at Theatre Passe Muraille, we have a show called Flin Flon Cowboy by Ken Harrower, who just is also a wheelchair user, a queer wheelchair user, and he's created a show about his life. I'm directing a show in February by a blind artist named Vivian Chong called Blind Dates, about kind of the foibles and struggles around that as well. So come check that out. And as well, we will have a deaf-led performance of an adaptation of The Little Prince by Landon Krantz. So it'll be done in visual vernacular, sign and voice and circus.
Oh, great.
Is that too many shout outs?
No, that was exactly what we wanted. These are a couple of practical. I wear hearing aids that can loop into the sound system of theaters. Are there any festival theaters equipped to support those design?
All of them. All of our spaces here have the, we call them HAR, the hearing assistance receiver devices. So yeah, please, you can reserve those when you book your tickets at all of our spaces.
Is it different? Yes. I wear hearing aids that can loop into the sound system of the theaters. Are there any festival theaters?
I'm looking at Dave at the back because he knows more about the tech than I might. So we can continue that conversation. Because
but also, I'm going to put the card here, and we're going to
because I know the system is older, and we've run into a lot of folks also having Bluetooth hearing aids now, and that's a different kind of system. And there's different challenges with like how rapidly like sound tech can change. So yeah, be happy to talk more about that.
But it's been asked out loud, so we're going to have it on record. It's on record now. Including parking for disabled audience members without cost is something that was written down on this. We're going to, some of these cards get passed up the ladder. Acknowledging that disability and accessibility is so personal, what are some universal practices we can rely on to be more welcoming, if any? By we, I mean everyone working in and outside the theater, disabled and non-disabled. We have 1 minute. Everybody gets to say one thing about that. Jess, what does it make you think?
I will echo what Kayla said earlier, which is my rule of thumb: no matter who you're talking to, ask them how you can help them. Ask them what they need. I know that in the past, potentially front of house folks have been, if you see a wheelchair user come in, you can't acknowledge that they're different. Oh no, we have to treat them the same. Ask everyone how you can help them. And that kind of takes that fear away. And if someone says, for example, I'm blind and I walk in and I go, if I have a assigned seat, I might need help finding my seat. And an usher going, oh, of course. Yeah. Versus why? Like, it kind of is common sense. So having that openness to care for whoever walks through your door really allows a disabled person, a blind person, to walk in and not feel like, oh, I'm asking for something different. Someone else might ask for that as well.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add?
I think it is so personal, and it is one-to-one, and it is just like, can we just have more empathy, or just more kindness, or just more awareness, and to ask that of where we are in the world and the time in which we live in. Maybe it's hard, but it's actually like one little step towards holding someone else and space for someone else. And if everyone does it, it's going to work. It's like, I kind of like when a fire truck goes by, everyone needs to do it for it to work. And so we have a little more empathy and kindness. It's going to work out.
My 30-second blurb will be a line that if I'm facilitating a room with actors and crew, we do something here called pre-rehearsal orientation. And when we do introductions, we invite people, okay, everyone share your name, your pronouns, and your access needs. And so something that is a light bulb moment for a lot of people is understanding and taking time to think about what are your access needs. Even if you don't identify as disabled, you have them. What are shoes, mobility aids? What are cars, giant electric wheelchairs? Think about what kind of sensory experience do you like to have, and go first, right? So model asking for your access needs to be met when possible. Hey, can we change the lights in here? Hey, can I have a different kind of chair? And then that helps to normalize other people asking for accommodation and difference, and making it less scary. So yeah, I invite you to think about your own access needs and then ask other people what theirs are.
You can't top that, guys. The takeaways from today are pretty delicious. I am so grateful to our brilliant, generous, real, completely inspiring panel. Thank you so much, Jessica, for being with us, Marjorie and Kayla. And thank you so much for being with us for this conversation today. From the bottom of my guts, I thank you. I'm going to bring James back up on stage to say goodbye. But in the meantime, I just wanted to...
Thank you for listening. This event was recorded as part of the Meighen Forum in front of a live audience in Lazaretus Hall at the Tom Patterson Theatre in Stratford, Ontario, Canada. Be sure to subscribe to keep up with the lively conversations and original performances housed by the Stratford Festival streaming service Stratfest at Home. And for making it this far in the episode, we're going to give you a gift. Enjoy 1 month free on Stratfest at Home with promo code FREEMONTH. Visit stratfestathome.ca and enter code FREEEMONTH to enjoy 1 month of free streaming content. It takes you, our listeners, to make this possible. It also takes the support of our dear collaborator. Support for the Meighen Forum is generously provided by Kelly and Michael Meighen and the T.R. Meighen Family Foundation. Original score for the Everyday Forum podcast was provided by Hilary Adams. Production support is provided by the film production and distribution team at the Stratford Festival. That is manager Yash Chabria, film editor Chris von Kleist, and director Jenna Dixon. The Meighen Forum team is producing assistants Renata Hansen and James Hyatt, coordinator Mira Henderson, manager Gregory McLaughlin, and director Julie Miles. Special thanks to Michael Adams, Jennifer Lee, Greg Doherty, Harper Charlton, and Kendallin Bishop. Finally, thanks to artistic director Anthony Cimolino and executive director Anita Gaffney. From here in Stratford, Ontario, on the land of the Neutrals and the Anishinaabe, see you next time. Ba Ma Pi.